You're mid-conversation. She says something interesting, something with a story behind it, and your brain just empties. You hear the words, you understand them, and then there's nothing. No follow-up, no curiosity, no response. Just the hum of your own internal voice asking, "What do I say now?" And the harder you reach, the worse it gets. That's not necessarily a personality problem. That's not just shyness. One likely reason your brain goes blank is that it's running two programs at the same time, and one of them is quietly eating everything the other one needs. This video isn't going to give you a list of better questions. It's going to show you why the questions you already ask feel dead on arrival, what's actually happening in your attention when a conversation clicks, and the one shift that changes everything about how you show up. Because the fix isn't a technique, it's understanding what the problem actually is. Most people think they go blank in conversations because they don't have anything interesting to say, or because they're awkward, or because they just weren't born with a social gene. But here's one way to think about it. The blank isn't coming from a shortage of content, it's coming from a shortage of space. Picture two programs running on the same computer. One is focused outward, listening, tracking what the other person is saying, noticing the details, building a picture of where the conversation could go. The other is focused inward, monitoring how you're coming across, calculating whether you seem weird, rehearsing what you'll say next, checking whether they still look interested. When those two programs run together, they share the same limited mental bandwidth, and that bandwidth has a ceiling. The more attention the self-monitoring program consumes, the less there is left for actually listening. And when listening degrades, when you stop catching the real details of what someone says, your questions stop being responsive and start being generic. "Oh, that's cool. How long have you been doing that?" Not because you're disinterested, because you miss the detail that would have made the question real. This can be one root of the social freeze, not a shortage of material, a split in attention. The reason most social advice doesn't fix this is that it targets the wrong layer. It tells you what to say, gives you openers, questions, frameworks, without touching the underlying resource problem. You can memorize 100 good questions, but if your attention is already full of self-monitoring by the time you need them, they're going to come out flat. So the real question isn't, "What should I ask?" It's, "What would happen if I stopped monitoring myself long enough to actually hear the answer?" In 2017, a researcher named Karen Huang ran a study on what makes people like each other in conversation. She had pairs of strangers talk, then measured how much each person liked the other afterward. She tracked what people actually said, specifically how many questions they asked and what kind. The result wasn't subtle. People who asked more questions were consistently liked more. The effect was especially clear for follow-up questions. Questions that could only have been asked because you actually heard what the person just said. Think about the difference. An interview question, "What do you do for work?" could be asked of literally anyone. It requires nothing from you except the memory that this is a thing people ask. A follow-up question, "Wait, was that always the plan, or did it kind of happen by accident?" can only be asked if you are actually paying attention. It requires you to have received something. That's what makes them feel different to the person being asked. A follow-up question often feels like proof. It's a receipt that says, "I heard you. I held on to what you said. I want more of that specific thing," not just a polite rotation through the standard topics. Picture two versions of the same conversation. Someone mentions they used to play music but stopped when they got busy with work. Version 1. "That's cool. What kind of music?" Version 2. "What made you stop?" Same topic, but one of those questions digs toward the story, and the other stays on the surface. The second question is harder to ask, not because it's more clever, but because it requires you to have caught the emotionally loaded word, stopped. A musician who stopped. There's something there worth asking about, but you can only see it if you were actually listening when she said it. A follow-up question isn't a social technique. It's a signal of where your attention was pointed. And that's the shift. Not ask more questions, not memorize better openers. It's notice more. Find the one detail that has a story behind it. Ask about that. The mechanism isn't in the words. The mechanism is in the attention that produces the words. Here's something that starts happening once people understand follow-up questions. They overcorrect. They stop sharing anything about themselves and just ask, trying to show interest, trying to be curious, trying to get the other person talking. And the conversation starts to feel like an interrogation. You've probably been on the receiving end of this. Someone who asks a lot of questions but never seems to give anything back. You're talking about yourself, but it doesn't feel like a real conversation. It feels like an interview. One person mining for information, the other just providing it. Research on intimacy and conversation shows that genuine closeness tends to build through self-disclosure on both sides. Not just questions, not just curiosity. Both people giving something. When only one side does the giving, the exchange can start to feel one-sided, even exposing. And separately, there's good evidence that talking about yourself is genuinely rewarding. Research by Tamir and Mitchell found that self-disclosure activates reward-related areas of the brain. But that reward doesn't fix the imbalance. Intimacy also depends on reciprocity, on both people feeling received. Without it, the exchange can start to feel less like connection and more like a transaction. The fix isn't complicated. It's just, give something real before you pass it back. Not deep, not vulnerable, just genuine. Someone asks how your weekend was. Instead of, fine, yours? Try something like, actually kind of strange. I ended up doing something I haven't done in years. That's one sentence, but it's a real sentence, not a placeholder. And then you pass it back. What about you? Did you actually manage to get out of the city? And now you've both given something. The conversation is no longer an extraction, it's an exchange. Think about a text message. You send something with some real emotional detail. You're excited about something, or frustrated, or uncertain. And the reply comes back, understood. End of thread. You know that feeling? Not angry, just deflated. Like the thing you gave didn't land anywhere. That's not about what the other person said. It's about what they didn't give back. The conversation needed reciprocity, and it didn't get it. The best conversations aren't one person performing curiosity at another. They're two people building something small together, one exchange at a time. Ask a real question. Give a real answer. Pass it back. That's the whole structure. Now, what if the topic itself is the problem? What if you're stuck talking about work, or the weather, or something that just doesn't feel like it has anywhere to go? Researchers actually tested this. A series of experiments put people in conversations about deliberately mundane topics, the most ordinary, everyday subjects they could find, and then measured how engaging those conversations actually felt. What they found: people consistently underestimated how interesting a conversation about a boring topic could become. The topic mattered less than people predicted. Engagement mattered more than people expected. A separate study looked at London area train commuters who were prompted to talk to strangers on their commute. People were held back less by imagining how the conversation would go, and more by the fear that others wouldn't want to talk. What actually happened? The people who struck up a conversation reported more positive experiences than those assigned to sit in silence. Not because the strangers were fascinating, because the actual conversation, the real one, with two people genuinely there, turned out to be more interesting than the imagined one. The barrier wasn't the conversation. It was the assumption about the conversation before it started. This shows up in one very specific way that most people have felt but never named. You ask someone, "What do you do?" And they tell you, and you're already 3 steps ahead, calculating whether this is interesting, whether you have anything to say about it, whether the topic has legs. Meanwhile, you miss the actual answer because you were busy prejudging it. The question that usually dies: what do you do? The question that opens something. Was that always the plan, or did it kind of happen? Same starting point, completely different trajectory. The second question isn't a better conversation hack. It's a genuine invitation to the story behind the fact. Many ordinary topics can become a real conversation if you actually use what the person gives you. They mention they moved cities recently. That's not a dead end. That's a story waiting to be pulled. They say they've been trying to sleep better. That's not small talk. That's something real happening in their life right now. The conversation is the topic. What you're talking about matters a lot less than whether you're actually building anything with it. There's one more thing quietly eroding social confidence, and it doesn't happen during the conversation, it happens after. You leave, you replay it, you rerun every moment that felt wrong, the pause that went too long, the question that landed flat, the thing you said that came out weird. And you build a case. They probably noticed all of it. They probably left thinking less of you. It probably didn't go as well as it seemed. Researchers have a name for this. Erica Boothby and her colleagues call it the liking gap. After conversations, people systematically underestimate how much the other person liked them and how much they enjoyed talking. The gap showed up reliably across settings, between strangers after a single conversation, between people who'd known each other for weeks, and it persisted for months in ongoing relationships. But here's the part that should concern you more than the gap itself. The gap feeds the loop. You feel like you failed. You go into the next conversation tighter, more guarded, more monitored. The self-monitoring gets worse. You feel like you failed again. Each interaction can seem to confirm the belief. The case against yourself keeps building, even when the original verdict may have been wrong. The critic that runs after a conversation is not a reliable narrator. It's tracking your internal experience, the stumbles you felt, the blanks you hit, the moments you wanted back, and projecting all of that onto the other person's memory. But the other person wasn't inside your head. They were hearing what you actually said. And on average, what you actually said may have landed better than it feels in memory. The research can't tell you their exact thoughts afterward, but it can tell you that people rate their conversation partners more positively than those partners predict, consistently, across settings. Research on how closeness actually develops between people shows something that cuts against the entire performance model. Connection builds through gradual escalation, small moments of genuine exchange stacked over time, not through getting it exactly right. A real exchange can matter more than a perfectly smooth one, because real exchange is what actually builds anything. The liking gap means you've probably been better at this than you thought. The self-monitoring may be protecting you from a threat you're overestimating. You don't need better questions. You need better attention. When you actually hear what someone says, catch the detail with a story behind it. The question writes itself. You don't manufacture it. You just follow the thing you noticed. When you stop trying to win the conversation and start following it, the blank brain gets quieter. The interrogation feeling disappears because you're not extracting anymore. You're responding. The post-conversation spiral shrinks because you stopped performing long enough to actually be there. On average, people are often more positive about you than you predict. You just have to show up to find out.